This happened to me a few years ago. On the day of Halloween, me and my siblings were giving out candy for trick-or-treaters. We planned to scare some kids with our costumes, and we had a nice and creepy setup. It was all going really well. We scared a few kids and gave out the candy as planned. Then all of my neighbours who were giving out candy eventually went back into their houses at about 11 PM because it was getting a bit late. It was about 11:30 PM when we noticed that there was a man in the middle of the road, about 80 feet away from us, just staring at our direction. We shrugged it off and thought it was just some douche that wanted to scare us. About 15 minutes passed and the man was still there. He suddenly walked towards us and held out his candy bucket and said, "Trick or treat." We started to get a bit nervous, but what could we do? We gave him some candy and the man went back to his spot from before and kept staring at us. We thought it would be better to go back inside, and so that's what we did, creeped the fuck out by this guy. We all stayed up late playing video games and eating snacks. I got up and went to the kitchen to get some more snacks when I got curious about the guy and wondered if he left. Me, being 100% positive that he wouldn't be there, checked the window where I could be able to see where he was at before. What I saw next still haunts me to this day. The same man was now in the damn driveway. The creepiest part was that he was wearing a fucking Leatherface mask and he was waving at me when he spotted me. He then put his index finger to his lips and went, while holding something behind his back. I was so shocked that I couldn't scream. I wanted to, but I just couldn't. I went back to my room and told my dad about it. He got up and went outside with a pistol, but couldn't see anything and just told me to go back to sleep. I literally did not close my eyes for the whole night while my siblings slept like babies. At around 3 AM, I heard some rustling outside my window. Knowing it was him, I was too scared to check my window and just froze trying to make out any noises. I then heard some knocks at my window and I could tell that he attempted to open it. Too scared to get up, I reached for my phone that was right next to me and called my dad and told him what was going on. He went back outside and told me that there was nothing. Eventually, the noise stopped and I went to sleep somehow. I soon forgot about it, and when I brought it up a few weeks ago, my dad told me the real truth about what happened that night. He said that the first time he went outside, he saw a man with an ugly mask, and he just waved at him and walked away, holding a basket full of candy. The second time, he only found a note that contained the phrase, "trick or treat." I don't know what this man's intentions were, and I don't know what would have happened if my dad had not gone out the first time with his pistol, and it still creeps me out to this day when I think about it. I don't know if that man was just being creepy, or if he had other intentions in mind.
Number 8.
I had moved to my mother's hometown in Idaho to be closer to her and her side of the family when I had this experience last Halloween. I wouldn't say her town is very big and there isn't much to do, even on the holidays. I didn't know the town well yet and had just started a new job at the local paper. I worked nights and often found my car to be the only one in the secluded parking lot. I didn't mind this so much because I'm a very private person and I like being alone. However, I had just started dating a friend who was slowly pushing me to perform at local shows. I'm a musician and have been writing music for about 9 years. He works as a booker for a venue in town and asked me to open a late Halloween show. I had just finished up my work for the night. It didn't feel like an odd night, though I was nervous about playing my set in an hour or so. It was around 9 PM when I started closing down my computer and gathering my things. The building is old and sort of falling apart. It's next to a road that connects to the highway, so at night there's really no one around. It's also neighbours with train tracks. While the trains aren't running, they're stored in the open on these tracks. The back door that I use daily exits to a side parking lot. The left side is cut off by rows of trains. The right side is the highway, and the back is a grassy area with small abandoned warehouses. The lot itself is barren, with cracked concrete and a large green dumpster at the end of the building closest to the trains. I used my keycard to open the door, and like most nights, my car was the only one in the lot. I had parked towards the back, but the lot wasn't very big, so I would be at my car in no time. I didn't see anything unusual as I scanned the immediate area for anything suspicious. I'm an extremely cautious person and try to be completely aware of my surroundings at all times. So, I was caught off guard when I turned to close the door and heard a low growl. It was like an imitation of my dog's growl, but it was somehow broken. It started low, but the voice would crack, causing an almost glitch-like sound. I froze, with my hand on the doorknob. I considered running back inside, but something stopped me, and I slowly let the door close and lock. I turned towards the sound. A figure was peeking out from behind the shadowed dumpster. I couldn't make out any features, but its eyes were like fire. They shined so bright that it hurt to look at them. I could make out this thing's arm, which was incredibly long and skinny. It looked like it had too many joints, like it had 2 elbows. The growling continued, but as it crept little by little out from the dumpster, the growling lessened until it was no longer growling at all. At this point, I could almost see its whole body. It did in fact have 2 elbows on both arms, and its legs looked like the hind legs of a dog. All the proportions of this thing were off. Its torso was too small, as if its hips and rib bones were touching. Its legs were as long as its arms, but looked too skinny to be able to support its weight. The hands and feet were also elongated, with tiny claws at the end of dead-looking fingers. It had no tail, no horns, no ears of what I could see. It was wrinkly, like a hairless cat, and its skin was a pale grey colour. It looked like it had never been in the sun. I wanted to vomit, but before I could do anything, I saw its face. It was mostly hairless, with tufts of matted fur misplaced all over its head and body. Its jaw was crooked and too big for the rest of its body. It looked similar to a snake's jaw, which frightened me even more as I pictured it eating me whole. As if it could hear my own thoughts, it laughed, a guttural, robotic ha-ha. I could hear thick liquid fall from its mouth and hit the pavement. Its breath was heavy and it was wheezing really badly. It looked up at me, still crouching about 10 feet away, and said,
"Blue eyes. I like them."
I have blue eyes, and they were tearing up as I was convincing myself that I had lived a good life to die at 21. It laughed again, but this time it was the sound of my own laugh over distorted voices. It rose slowly. It looked like it was at least 7 feet tall, and it would be able to grab me after one step. But with a loud, high-pitched, cracking scream, it turned and ran on its hind legs to the trains. Though the tracks were close, it was impossible for a human to reach them in the time that this thing did. He turned one last time to look at me, then crawled between 2 of the train cars. I was finally able to move. As I realized that I had no idea what the fuck I just witnessed, I threw up harder than I ever had before. Before this incident, I was a serious atheist that didn't believe in the paranormal. In fact, my boyfriend is also an atheist, so I've never told him what happened. I haven't told anyone what happened because I know it sounds so ridiculous. I never saw it again, but Halloween is coming up and I have to work late in the same building. I'm hoping that it doesn't visit me again.
Number 7.
I used to live near a farm, and every Halloween they'd have several weeks of festivities. These festives included attractions such as the haunted hayride, the haunted house, and the haunted corn maze. In fact, now that I think about it, they use the word haunted in almost every attraction. I think the only things that weren't haunted were the bonfire and the hot dog stand. I'm a 22-year-old female with 2 24-year-old close male friends I met in high school. I was moving away soon, and we wanted to spend as much time as we could together while we still could. So of course, we decided to go to the farm festivities together. It was pretty fun. I especially loved the haunted hayride because they had some pretty hunky actors. But the haunted house was a bit much for me. I hate small enclosed areas, and will get freaked out pretty quickly when a lot of stuff is happening in a tiny place. I knocked over and nearly trampled my other friends several times. So when we got outside to an open cornfield, I was relieved. And while that part was the least scary to me, it may have been the part where I was in the most danger. Standing in front of us was a man dressed up in some typical haunted house gear, a fake chainsaw prop, a pale white mask, scraggly clothes wrought with red stains. He began talking, and the first thing out of his mouth to me was,
"Are these two your little fuck buddies?"
I gave a guffaw of laughter. The mere thought of these lovable dorky oafs I'd spent years being buddies with, and me being involved like that, was so out of this world to me that all I could do was laugh. It was such a funny thought that I played along and told him yes, which got my friends joining along in the laughter. But the man didn't laugh, he just kept talking. He started saying things like how he was going to watch us go at it, and then he was going to torture us after we did it, and that he would even join in. He continued to go into great detail. My friends and I just kept laughing, more nervously now, like if we stopped laughing, this wouldn't be a joke anymore. It would just be this weird older guy in a cheesy Halloween outfit talking about how he wanted to have sex with all of us. Finally, he revs up his chainsaw prop and tells us that we have 10 seconds to run, and if he catches us, he's going to murder my two friends and rape me. Relieved to finally get away from this guy, I burst off into a jog through the cornstalks for a bit and then begin to taper off into a walk again. But my two friends keep yelling at me to run. Confused and frustrated because I'm lazy, I oblige them and continue to run until we arrive at the next part of the haunted house. I ask my friends who kept telling me to run, and they tell me it's because the man was right behind me the whole time. The part that makes this whole thing seem a little bit more sinister than just a corny haunted house actor was what came while we made our way to my friend's car in the parking lot after enjoying the rest of the attractions. We came across a man hanging around while we made our way through the dark. He asked us how we liked the fair. He made it seem like he was on edge about entering or not, which doesn't make much sense now that I think about it. Why would some guy be hanging around the parking lot deciding whether or not he wanted in, especially since the farm was only half an hour away from closing? The part that stood out to me was, as we said our goodbyes to the strange man, I felt his eyes rake up and down my body, and he asked me how I liked the part in the haunted house in the cornfield. I'm sure that if this guy had really tried anything, he would have been in for a nasty surprise. As a teenager, I received my black belt in a form of Korean martial arts based around self-defense called Tang Soo Do, but I wonder if things would have been different for another girl that night. One with perhaps a smaller frame, a meeker inclination, and maybe not traveling with two other guys, each over 6 feet tall.
Number 6.
I am a female senior in high school and an avid runner. I spend at least an hour most days in the wooded hills behind my house, running the trails. In my runs, I've seen some pretty weird stuff, but this one has to be the one that freaked me out the most. This was during the outbreak of supposedly killer clowns in late 2016. People kept talking about how there were sightings all over, but no one ever actually saw one or directly knew someone who did. Because of this, I mostly considered the whole thing to be a hoax and continued with my late night runs. It was a Friday, and I was just entering the park at the foot of the hills as the sun was getting low in the sky. It was no big deal to me, just meant more open trail. The park was empty for the most part, except a few kids from my school smoking weed. I waved, and one of them I knew from my English class flagged me down. Grudgingly, I talked to them for a few minutes, and they rambled about some guy lurking around and how he was kind of freaking them out. I didn't think too much of it, assuming they were high or something. But just in case, I did take my headphones out of my ears. It was nice to enjoy the sounds of nature anyways. By the time I had managed to find a break in the conversation to excuse myself, it was significantly darker than I wanted it to be. Not night yet, but late evening. I knew that I would have to avoid the park ranger later while trying to get out, but that was honestly all that was worrying me. Nothing too important happened up the whole run up the hillside, but I was a bit on edge. Maybe I had taken some of the stoner's words to mind, as every rustle caused me to jump, and there were a lot of rustles, loud ones too. I forced myself to assume rabbits or maybe deer, but there was still that nagging doubt. When I had finally reached the hilltop, the rustles had quieted down and the whole thing was out of my mind. The city below me sparkled in the darkness, and I took a moment to relax against a tree and zip up my hoodie, as the night air had gotten a little chilly. And that was when I saw him. Trudging up the other side of the hill from the trail I needed to go down was a fucking clown. An incredibly stereotypical one too, with the big collar, fat belly, and frizzy hair. He even had balloons in his hand to complete the look. But one important thing I noticed, no weapon. Immediately, I ducked behind a tree, hiding in the shadows. The guy bent over and took a breath, obviously not noticing me. Probably a practical joker looking for some late hikers. But that's when the adrenaline hit. I whipped out my phone and started recording, addressing my Instagram followers and whispering how I was going to unmask a clown. Yeah, real smart of me, right? I guess, really up until this, I was in that teenage phase where you think nothing can hurt you. Plus, I was pumped on adrenaline and had a pocket knife, which was more than he had. So I, for some stupid reason, thought that it was a great idea. "Hey, fucker!" I yell loudly, startling the guy. "You think this is funny, asshole? You better fucking run, clown, or the whole world's gonna know what a sick fuck you are." I took a few steps forward, hoping he would run. I guess even in my pump state, I was still cautious. The man just leered at me, cocking his masked face. Then, he lifted his head as if to look behind me, and broke into a sprint in the opposite direction. "Yeah, that's right, you better run." It was at this moment that there was a loud cackle behind me, causing me to whip around. Behind me, tearing out of the bushes, was the reason the clown ran. There was another, and unlike the other, this one was wearing all black with the clown mask. No real creepy clothing, but the thing that terrified me most was what he was carrying. A fire axe. This was where I lost my shit. Fuck this man. I didn't care if this guy was a practical joker or not. I was sure as hell not going to wait around to find out. He howled and cackled, screaming like a madman behind me as I flew down the hill. My heart was pounding in my ears and I glanced back, only to see him around the corner. He was gaining on me. At this rate, I wouldn't make it out of the park in time, but I had one thing I was hoping would be going for me and not him. I knew these hills. So, as we rounded a corner, I did the only thing I could think of. I leapt off the trail, throwing myself off a 5-foot ledge and into thick clusters of bushes that covered the ground. Unfortunately, the bushes didn't pad the fall enough and I tumbled, my ankle getting jammed against a rock and my phone flew out of my jacket pocket. I just curled up there, hiding under the brush as best as I could. Well, I guess the guy either didn't see me, or he decided I wasn't worth jumping out into poison oak for, because when I finally looked up, there was no one on the trail. But I was not going back up there. Hell no. After a few feeble moments of looking for my phone, I gave up and began to limp out of the brush, heading down the hill off trail. Long story short, the limp down the hill was tense and painful, but I made it to the parking lot where I ran into the ranger as she locked up. At first, she started to lecture me, as she always did when she found me out late, but as soon as she noticed my limp, she let me speak. We called the police on her phone, and I got a ride home while they searched the area. The next day, they came to my door and told me what they found. Sadly, they didn't find either of the guys, but they did find a car parked on one of the fire roads. The car had been reported stolen a week ago, and inside they had found duct tape, various pieces of black clothing, and a fire axe. Since this, I've not been within a mile of those hills, and I have advised everyone I know to do the same.
Number 5.
October 31st was always a letdown for me, not because anything particularly bad happened on it, but more that I always missed that child sense of wonder I had on Halloween as a kid. I guess you could say that I craved it coming back. I'm 23 now, in college, and I still celebrated Halloween in college, but it was different. I wanted it to be joyful and innocent like it was when I was a kid again. Last year, I thought I'd try and reclaim some of that wonder by giving out candy to the local kids. I go to a large university and live in a small middle-class suburb that's pretty close to it. A few of my friends and I rent out a house together. Last year, my friends were drinking and going out to party that night, but I wasn't. All I wanted was to relax, watch some spooky movies and make some kids' days better. It was almost sundown. I just finished my homework and popped my favorite Halloween movie into the DVD player, Trick or Treat. The movie is an anthology of a bunch of different stories that tie together at the end. Whenever I watch it, it brings me back to the sense of wonder again, and I like that. I was about 30 minutes into it, and then I heard a knock at the door. Excitedly, I got up and grabbed a bowl of candy. I had an assortment of things kids might like, some of my favorites from when I was a kid. I had Reese's, Starbursts, M&Ms, and Kit Kats. I opened the door and there were 2 kids. They yelled trick or treat excitedly. I asked them what they were, even though it was obvious. One was a ghost and the other was dressed as a turtle. I threw them a handful of good stuff and they were happily on their way. This was the way the night went for the next few hours. Playful knocking, me giving out candy, and making pathetic attempts at humor. It was therapeutic actually. I liked making the kids happy and I was enjoying reminiscing with my favorite Halloween fix. I rarely took this much time for myself and it was great to have some peace and quiet. There came a point when it had been about 45 minutes since my last knock on the door. It was nearing 10 PM and I figured that it was well past the bedtime of most kids. I was thinking about closing up shop and calling it a night on giving out candy when, out of nowhere, a large heavy thud rammed against my door. I nearly jumped out of my chair. Was this some college kid playing a prank? I figured so. I know, I'm a college kid too, but I mostly keep to myself. I don't cause trouble. I got out of my chair, grabbed my baseball bat and walked over to the door. I peered through the blinds over the side windows and I couldn't see anyone. So I opened the door, stepped outside and looked around. It was dark now and I couldn't see very far into the night. I thought about yelling, but I knew if I did, I'd just be giving them exactly what they wanted. So I just yelled, "Happy Halloween, guys!" and threw some candy on the front doorstep. I figured leaving that there would be a nice positive way to tell them to fuck off. It had been about 15 minutes since the loud thud and I figured my attempt worked. I had turned all the lights off and closed the blinds so any sign that anyone was home was absent. I didn't expect anyone to think I was home at this point, let alone prank me. Trick or Treat was in its final scene now. The little boy that played the spirit of Halloween was in the process of fighting an old man. I admit, it was cheesy, barely suspenseful, and did little more than intrigue you in hopes of finding out who the little boy actually was. The actual fight wasn't particularly riveting either. But just then, again, I heard the loud thud on my door. I didn't jump as much this time, as I almost expected it. I got up, paused my movie and walked to the door again. I didn't waste any time. I stepped outside immediately, bat in hand and got into the front stairway looking around. What the hell? There was nobody there. These kids were fast, I thought. But then I heard the thud again. Shit, no wonder I wasn't seeing anyone. It wasn't coming from my front door. That thud was coming from the door to the backyard. This scared me. Our neighborhood was nice and my front yard was well lit, but the back of our house was facing a forest, a deep forest, and on the sides of our yard we had a fence, and it wasn't any small thing either. It was a good 8 feet tall and had sharp points at the top. Any thought of jumping over it would have deterred a lot of people. I went back inside and turned on all of the lights, including the spotlights in the backyard. I looked around for a few minutes and didn't see anything out there, but just before I called it quits, I saw it. A large man, probably at least 6 feet tall, just standing there, staring out from the darkness in the very back of my yard, right at me. He didn't budge when I saw him, he just stood there. I went back inside and went to my closet to swap my bat for something a little bit more intimidating. I grabbed my roommate's rifle and went back to the backyard. I opened the door, walked a few steps out onto our porch and yelled, "Look, I don't have a clue who you are, but you need to leave. I'm going to call the police and when they get here, you better be gone." I went back inside. I dialed 911 and told the man on the line that there was someone in the backyard. While I did this, he started walking towards me though. This was freaking me out. He started slowly just shuffling towards me. His shuffle turned into what I can only describe as nearly strides though. As my conversation with the police progressed, I backed up into the house and shut the door. At this point, the police said that they were sending an officer right away. I got off the phone with them, comforted slightly by the fact that I'd have help here shortly. Just as this happened though, the man stepped into the light. He was wearing a hockey mask, had menacing eyes, and in his right hand he had what was undoubtedly a knife. Even though he saw me holding a rifle, he He walked without reservation all the way up to my back porch and slammed his left hand against the door while he looked through the side window at me. He kept doing this, just staring at me. Now, this next part is going to sound a bit ridiculous, but I swear it happened. I raised my rifle and yelled, "Get off my property now, or I swear I'm going to shoot you." But he didn't budge. Fuck it. I shot through the window and hit the bastard right in the neck. He fell to the ground and yelled. I rushed to the window holding my gun, ready to use this situation to my advantage. But when I got to the back door, there was only a patch of blood in the backyard, and I swear there was a blood-stained white sheet just laying there. The kind of sheet you'd see a little kid throw over himself with eye cutouts on Halloween. But nobody was in it. It was just there. The police arrived a little while after this happened. They took samples of the blood from the backyard, took the sheet to look into it and take a DNA sample from that too, and even scoured the backyard and the forest for the knife that the man was holding, or possibly even the man. They told me they'd keep an eye out for people entering hospitals with gunshot wounds for the next few weeks and would let me know if they found anything. My roommates finally got home from the party long after the police had left, and I told them the situation. I sure was glad to have them there, although I was pretty confident that the situation was resolved anyways. It would have been a huge undertaking for someone in that shape to come back and try anything. After a few minutes, I went to bed. I was settling in, turned on my lamp, and opened a textbook to do a bit of reading before bed when I leaned against my wall and felt something wet. Up against the wall, next to my bed, there was a caked layer of blood. I screamed and ran out of the house calling the police. I got my roommates out too and we waited outside while the police came. When the cops showed up, they searched the whole house and stationed a patrol car out front for the night to watch over us. Their search yielded nothing. This was the last we heard of this for the next few weeks. We eventually got a call back from the police. They told us that they found a match for the DNA that they found at the scene. It was a match with a man in his 90s. Except, this man was dead. He died 25 years ago in this exact house in a drug deal that went bad. My roommates and I jumped ship with this one. We found a new place and moved out a week later. I still have no clue what was going on with that place, but it scares me to death. Was it some kind of hoax gone wrong, or did I actually see a ghost? Who was that man? Was the blood planted? I have no fucking idea.
Number 4.
This happened to me on Halloween of 2015. My friends and I, Jack, Will, Lucas and Sarah, had all made plans to go trick-or-treating together in Will's neighbourhood. It's important to keep in mind that Will's neighbourhood is not the safest. There was the occasional druggie and drug dealer, but other than that, his neighbourhood wasn't too bad. It was 8 PM and I was all dressed up in my Scream costume with the fake blood all over the mask. I got a call from Will and I accepted the call. "Dude, where are you? We're all waiting. Lucas, Jack and Sarah are all here. Hurry up, man." Will exclaimed. "I'm on my way," I said. I ran all the way to Will's neighbourhood and saw them waiting. Lucas was dressed as a clown, Sarah was Fiona from Shrek and Will was dressed as Popeye from the Disney cartoon. We all gave each other hugs and we were on our merry way, going door to door screaming trick or treat. Everything was going just fine. We finished the last house and we were satisfied with the amount of candy we got, so we decided to go back home. Since Will was already in his neighbourhood, he was the first to leave. We were nearing the gate of Will's neighbourhood, and as we were walking through the gate, Lucas pointed out a Toyota van slowly following us. We all tried to reason as to why this van was following us, but we were all low-key scared shitless. We all decided to speed walk out of Will's neighbourhood, and we were huddled together because we felt safer that way. The entire time, I had a strong feeling of eyes staring at the back of my head. It made my skin crawl knowing that some creep was just watching us. As we were walking, the van suddenly sped up to the left of us, and the window rolled down. I was met with a skinny man with bloodshot eyes. He smiled at us, and I saw that he only had roughly 6 teeth, all of which were terribly yellow. My creeper alert went off instantly, and it felt really hard to breathe with this man staring at us. We stared back at him and then he said,
You kids want some more candy?
and stupid Sarah said, Sure. Now, keep in mind, Sarah was one of those people who could never say no to anybody or anything, no matter what they asked for. But myself and Lucas gave her the face of, Are you crazy? We noticed the man reach into the back of his car, and he came back with 3 bags of what I assumed was candy. He handed one to each of us. I opened the bag and saw your usual candy, Snickers, Twix, etc. Sarah said thanks, but before we could leave, he said something that gave me goosebumps.
Enjoy those candies, kids. They're extra good.
And then he drove off. Myself and Lucas were creeped the fuck out. A few minutes later, and we were all home. It was about 12 now, and I was tired. I poured out all of the candy in my bag, and I was happy to see so much candy lying on the ground in front of me. I grabbed the bag of the candy the man gave us. I had a very bad feeling about the candy in there. So just to check, I grabbed a fun-sized Snickers bar and I split it in half. And I saw something that will haunt me forever until the day I die. In one of the halves was a razor blade. I frantically grabbed my phone and called Sarah and Lucas. I warned them about the bag of candy the man gave each of us. I filed a police report the next day and I gave them a description of the man and his vehicle, handing the officer the bag of candy the man gave us. Unfortunately though, the man was never caught. I never went trick-or-treating ever again. To all you parents out there, please check your children's candy every Halloween, because you never know what type of sick fucks are out there.
Number 3.
So this started in early 2013 and continued on until it peaked on Halloween night of that year. I live in a small town in Texas and there isn't really a whole lot to do. My friend Richard and I used to always meet up at the park after we got off of work just to visit each other. He would usually bring his girlfriend Katie along with him. I was about 19 when this all started. Richard and Katie would have been either 19 or 20. When we started meeting up, everything seemed normal. We would just stand by our trucks and talk about how much we hated our jobs. After a few weeks of doing this, we started to notice strange things happening around us. It started off innocent enough, but little did we know where it was going to lead us. The first thing that happened was we started noticing animals coming around and acting strange. Random cats would come and sit and calmly stare at us. They would appear out of nowhere and be sitting in front of our trucks when we tried to leave. I'll admit, it made us feel a little creeped out, but not too bad. We thought that maybe they belonged to the people that lived near the park. A few weeks later, my friend Dylan had joined us and we were standing on the jungle gym just visiting amongst the 4 of us. It was getting late and the police had come through to tell us that the park was closing soon and we would have to leave. By this point, the police knew who we were and knew that we weren't breaking any laws, so they had no problem allowing us to visit while they checked the rest of the park. As long as we didn't hold them from locking the gate too long, they allowed us to take our time leaving. I decided to use the restroom before leaving since I needed to go pretty bad and had a long drive home. I told the others that I would be back in a second, and to let the officers know that I was on my way back if I was still in the restroom when they came back to the gate. I walked to the restroom and did my business. As I started to walk back, I saw Richard walking to the restroom that I just came from. "You too?" I shouted to him, jokingly. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. This was really strange, considering that he is just as much of a smartass as I am, so he always had something sarcastic to say back. I brushed it off and thought maybe him and Katie had an argument. This wasn't unusual, so I just walked back to the trucks. Upon arriving at the trucks, I was shocked to see Richard standing there. There was no way that he could have gotten past me without me seeing him, and yet here he was, laughing and carrying on as usual. I told everyone what happened and they all seemed fairly surprised. We decided it was time to leave and we would come back the next night. A few nights later, our friend Johnny came along instead of Dylan and we decided to explore the woods behind the park. This area used to be a dumping ground for various gangs in our town, and who knows, maybe we would find something crazy. When we got into the trees far enough to where we could not see the park, we found a creek. We crossed it and found a walking path. Obviously, we weren't the first people to go through that area. We started following it, using only our cell phones as flashlights. I was in the front, with Johnny, Katie and Richard following, in that order. I looked back to make sure that I wasn't walking too fast, and noticed a black figure standing on the hill, watching us. I shone my light up at it to see what fucking creep was stalking us. As my light hit it, the figure just vanished. No sound or anything. It was as if it was never there. I turned around to keep going, and standing there, about 15 to 20 feet ahead of us, was a solid white figure with its hand out as if it was signaling us to stop. I shit myself and ran back to the trucks. I swear that I even walked on water when I crossed the creek. The next day, Johnny and I decided to go back during the day since we both had the day off and see what the figure was trying to keep us from. We followed the path through the woods and found out that it led directly to a bridge. We went under it and found a ton of graffiti. Everything from the usual gang signs and so-and-so was here to fucking pentagrams. This freaked me out quite a bit, so we decided to head back and call the others to let them know what we'd found. When we called them, Katie mentioned doing a paranormal investigation of the park since Halloween was coming up. I liked the idea since I grew up watching shows like Ghost Hunters. We started buying the cameras and everything, and I went to the parks department of our city government to ask permission to stay overnight in the park, and surprisingly, they gave us permission with little to no problem. Halloween rolled around and we pulled up in my Suburban. It was the only vehicle we had big enough to carry all of us and our gear. I decided we should drive around and check out the park before we got started so we would know how many people were still there and where they were. We made our rounds and were surprised to discover that the park was fairly empty. On our way back up to the front where the pavilion that we would use as a base camp was, we noticed a fog had rolled in. I found this a little odd considering the weather was not beneficial for fog this night. I then received a text from the police letting me know that they'd removed the last of the people from the park and we were now all alone and locked in. As I looked up, I saw a black figure standing directly in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes but ran right through it. Once the Suburban came to a stop, I heard a low voice whisper something directly into my ear that still gives me chills.
You should not be here. You will leave.
It said in the most demonic voice I've ever heard. I literally jumped out of the car screaming as loud as I could. "Get me the thermal camera!" I shouted, knowing good and well that a regular camera would be useless in this fog. Richard handed it to me and I began panning around with it, hoping to catch someone playing a joke on us. As I panned over to the trees, I realized that we were standing directly in front of the path through the woods that we took to get to the bridge. I was scared shitless at this point. I found a stump and decided to leave a voice recorder on it. We drove back up to the pavilion, and before we got there, the fog lifted just as quickly as it had come. We could now see completely across the other side of the park. I decided to walk back to the stump where I'd left the recorder. When I got there, I found that the recorder was knocked off of the stump. I picked it up and went to set it back on the stump. Before I set it down though, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. It came from directly in the trees in front of me. Knowing this used to be a dumping ground for gangs, I took off running back to the others. When I got back to base camp, we played back the recording. Oddly enough, no one else heard the gunshot, but the recording was even stranger. You heard nothing, absolutely nothing. Not me sitting on the stump, not it falling off. The first thing you could hear was me picking it off the ground, followed by a growl before hearing me taking off running. We then decided to split up. I took Richard and we went to the bridge. Johnny and Katie would walk around the perimeter and try to see if anyone was there. As Richard and I made our way to the path, we saw 3 figures walking a different direction, not even acknowledging us. We followed them to let them know that they weren't supposed to be here and we would call the police if they didn't leave. We followed them to a bend, only to discover that they had disappeared. It was then that we realized that they had led us directly to the bridge. We went under it and started recording. About an hour and a half to 2 hours into our time there, I began noticing shadows of people walking on the bridge. Richard went up to check it out, only to discover that there was no one there. Fucking lovely, I said under my breath. And then I heard it.
Fucking lovely.
It was the same voice that had whispered in my ear in the car, and now it was mimicking me. I turned to look in the direction that it was coming from, and I could see a figure in the water with its head sticking out from the nose up, just watching us. I turned to Richard, and I could tell from the look on his face, he was seeing it too. We got the hell out of there, and never looked back.
Number 2.
I remember it like it was yesterday, although this occurred around what I want to say was my junior year of high school, maybe my senior year. Either way, it was over 15 years ago. The story takes place in an East Coast city of the United States. A few friends along with myself were roaming the neighborhood like a bunch of wannabe badasses looking for trouble on Halloween Eve, better known as Devil's Night, where I'm from. Devil's Night is when all the bad shit is done. TPing front lawns, egging houses, flaming bags of shit left on porches, followed by a ring of the doorbell and a dash into the night, etc. You know, the typical mischief for this time of year. Each of us had our backpacks filled with stuff like cartons of eggs and rolls of toilet paper. Now, as idiotic as we were to get ourselves in a sticky situation that I'm sure we'll never forget, we were smart enough not to be in the neighborhood that we were residents of. It wasn't super far away from where we actually lived, just a few towns over, probably a 30-minute walk there and back at best, but it was definitely far enough to where no one knew us. Plus, we had Halloween masks on, to be extra sure. As we got deeper into the neighborhood, we saw other kids running around, acting wild already. So we said fuck it, let's get in on the action. We began egging homes, egging random people while walking their dogs, writing dumb shit on car windows with wet bars of soap, shit like that. While we were doing this, one of the guys with us mentioned that he kept seeing this truck driving around, a blue one with a truck bed on the back. We brushed it off and chalked it up to paranoia. Dude, relax, you're just freaking out because it's Devil's Night and you think people are out to get you. I told him. To be honest, he's always been a people watcher, if you will, always aware of his surroundings. I'm guessing he got that from his father, who was retired military. I don't know. But we went on to find out that he was spot on about this truck. After a while, it was getting late and we were running out of devilish goodies. One of our other buddies had asthma and decided to forget his inhaler as if we weren't going to be doing a lot of running. So we all agreed to wrap it up for the night and head back to our part of town. As we're walking towards the end of the street, my buddy says, "Guys, look, there's that blue truck again." It was pretty much in the middle of the street that we were walking up. It's probably just some idiots out here doing the same shit that we're doing, I told him. Then, all of a sudden, the headlights to the truck shut off. The street was really dark now. Any illumination mostly came from the outside lights of people's homes. Then, out of nowhere, this fucker darts towards us. We all stayed still in shock until the truck got about 10 yards in front of us. Then we made a dive towards the curve. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I screamed. We all looked down the street at the truck as it bent to a sharp left, tires screeching in the process. At this point, my buddy's asthma is really acting up, and to add insult to injury, he almost gets smacked by the truck. It was definitely time to call it a night. JW, one of the four that was with us, goes off. "Can you believe that motherfucker almost hit us? He didn't even slow down, that son of a bitch." We were all pretty pissed about it, but more glad that nothing happened to us. But JW was clearly pissed. "Man, that could have been so much fucking worse. We could have been badly injured or even killed." I said, "Fuck this. If we see this dickhead truck again, it's getting egged." He replies. Between the four of us, we had about 9 eggs left, and we got them ready just in case this fucker comes back around. At the time, we didn't want to argue with JW, but we all knew that this was a bad idea. As we began our journey home, we hear that same screeching from the tires. "Shit, here he comes," one of my other buddies say. We hid in some bushes and waited for the truck to reach the stop sign. Because we were at the corner house, it put us no more than 4 yards away from the truck. "Okay, as soon as this asshole pulls off, we let him rip," JW whispers. It felt like forever, but was maybe only 30 seconds. The truck peels off, and seconds later, we stand up, eggs in hand, and begin hurling them at the truck. I swear, every single egg landed. The truck comes to a screeching halt and slams in reverse, coming back towards us. We take off, jumping a gate to a backyard which brings us to an alley. And to make matters worse, I notice that we're running the opposite direction of the town we live in, going deeper into this neighborhood that we knew little about. Seconds later, the truck darts through the alley that we're running up. We cut into another backyard, immediately looking for somewhere to hide as our buddy's asthma is getting worse. We hear the truck stop and the door open. A spotlight is going from one part of the yard to the other. This fucker has a flashlight, I said to myself. We were hiding for what must have been at least 15 minutes. No footsteps could now be heard, but we knew that he was still there, as we could hear the rumbling of the truck engine. JW makes a gesture as to take a peek to see if this guy was in sight or not, and if he wasn't, we were going to try and make a dash for it. I gave him that look that I didn't think that was a smart idea, but he did it anyways. The second he pops his head up, a gunshot is fired and ricochets off of the tool shed that we were crouched down by. We fucking take off immediately towards the front of the house that we were hiding at, leading us back to the main street. We were running to the other side of the street when one of the guys with us loses his balance in the middle of the road. Honestly, of all fucking places. Just as he falls over, the truck comes screaming down the road. We manage to pull him out of the way just in time. The truck makes a U-turn, and at this point, we're cutting in between cars, waiting for the right time to make a run for another backyard. I noticed that a lot of the yards on this side of the street have yard gates that are at least 7 feet. Out of nowhere, another shot was fired. At this point, I'm thinking that this had to be a .45 Colt or a Magnum, because it fucking roared with every bullet. We dart towards a backyard as 2 more shots go off, ricocheting off the trees and concrete, and by some miracle, we manage to make it to a backyard. We hear footsteps running away from us, and the door of the truck slam, and not a second later, the truck peels away. My guess was the people in the neighborhood heard the shots, as we noticed porch lights coming on and front doors opening. All of a sudden, the back porch light in the backyard that we were hiding in comes on, and the back door swings open.
Who's back there? I have a gun. Show yourself. I won't ask twice.
A man says. We show our hands first as we step into the light to reveal ourselves, pleading with the man that we were just hiding from a maniac out there with a gun trying to kill us. He lowered his gun and stared at us for a few seconds.
Do any of you young men have any weapons?
We responded no, in a panic, still clearly scared from the night's events. The man invited us inside, and we felt really safe once we found out that the guy was an off-duty police sergeant. He made us call our parents to let them know that we were safe. He even went as far as contacting an on-duty police officer to take us back to our part of town. He asked if we knew the guy that was chasing us, and we told him we had no idea, and we didn't get a view of him or his license plate, so we couldn't give a concrete description. All we could say was it was a dark blue pickup truck. Thankfully, we made it back to our neighborhood, safe and sound, thanks to the police. Till this day, I always wonder if the guy knew who we were and was waiting for the situation to die down before he came back looking for us again. Either way, I was scared straight, and that was the last Devil's Night that I ever went out on.
Number 1.
In 1994, when I was 23, I decided to go on a week-long camping trip alone to get my thoughts together. I had just graduated from college here in California and needed to make some decisions about my future. I decided to go camping in Los Padres National Forest as I had been there before as a kid and it was quite peaceful. I packed my things, drove to the park and bought the week primitive camping pass I needed. I told my parents where I was going and they weren't too excited about me going alone, but because I'm a male and well built, they only asked that I packed a knife for protection, and I obliged. I parked my car and set forth down the trail that I had chosen. My plan was to hike to a small pond that was about 12 miles down the trail and spend my week there fishing, relaxing and thinking about what I should do with the rest of my life. I hiked from the morning to about 6 p.m. and took my time taking pictures, eating my lunch and even writing in my journal. At about 6 p.m. I finally reached the pond and I unpacked my tent and equipment and got ready to sleep. I was so tired that I passed out and didn't wake up until the morning. In the morning, I made some coffee, made a PB&J sandwich and threw my fishing line into the pond. Over a couple of hours, I caught a couple of bluegill and was getting some much needed solitude. I gutted my fish and put them back into the water so they could stay cool for a couple of hours. After this, I went back to my tent and decided to take a nap. I fell asleep quickly. About 30 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a woman crying hysterically from what seemed to be a few hundred meters away. I instinctively got up quickly and opened my tent and turned towards where I could hear the crying. And what I saw scared me instantly. I saw a naked woman about 70 meters away in what I could guess was her 40s, walking in my direction. She had long brown hair that was tangled, and her face was contorted in a way that made her cries that much more frightening. This woman was filthy all over, and she was bleeding from what I could only describe as a groin, genital region. My first reaction was shock, but after a few seconds, I cleared my head and ran into my tent to grab my knife. I then walked over to the lady who was still crying hysterically and asked her what had happened. As I got close to her, she reached out to me as if to give me an embrace. I hesitantly gave her one of my hands to hold onto and then walked her over to my tent. She didn't say a word, she just kept crying and leaning herself on me. When we got to my tent, I handed her some paper towels and some extra clothes I had. I then asked her again what had happened and if I could help her clean up or help her in any way that I could. She ignored the towels and clothes and just let them fall on the floor. She then asked me in a smoky, exhausted voice, really low, if she could lay down in my bed. I thought she was a rape victim for sure and told her yes, definitely. She then laid down on top of my sleeping bag and just kept crying and shaking. I decided to just let her be for a while and started packing up my stuff as I figured I would have to run back to get help for this woman as there was no cell phone reception there. After about 25 minutes, I collected all of my belongings and walked over to the tent to see if the woman had calmed down. I unzipped the tent and looked inside. The woman was just lying there, no longer crying but just staring at nothing. I again asked her what had happened, but she didn't answer. I then began to tell her that I was going to go and run and get help and that she could come with me or just stay here until help arrived. Again, she said nothing. I then told her that I was going to run to the ranger station and that I would be back as soon as possible. I left her some water and some food and started walking back towards the trail. As I got to the trail, I heard a man's voice yelling from across the pond from our point. I turned to where I heard the yelling and saw a man about 200 meters away, also naked, with a long beard and lots of body hair. I couldn't understand what he was saying at first, but as he got closer, I could understand the words. I am no good, I am no good, in a low, almost unintelligible groan. I was so freaked out at this point that I was frozen in fear. I was thinking about my options when I noticed the woman getting out of the tent and started walking towards the man with arms wide open. He then began running towards her and she towards him. When they reached each other, they then embraced. At this point, I was in total confusion and shock about what was happening. I just stood there and watched whatever it was I was watching happen. After what seemed like 30 minutes, they let go of each other and I could see them talking. The woman pointed towards me and then pointed towards her stomach. They then talked for a little while longer and then both of them started walking over towards me. I again just stood there trying to figure out what the hell was going on. As they got within 50 meters of me, the woman and man both yelled at me almost simultaneously, "You can help us." I, still confused, yelled back at them, "Help with what? What happened?" The man and the woman didn't reply, but only put their arms in a baby swaddling position in the universal signal for baby. I yelled back at them, "What baby?" in a concerned voice. The man then said, "I'm no good, we need you for baby." I then said, "I don't understand," and started to take a few steps back. At this point, the woman grabbed 2 large rocks from the ground and handed one to the man. They began running towards me. I was terrified and dropped my backpack on the ground and started sprinting as fast as I could down the trail. I could hear them screaming at me, "We need your help with baby," over and over again at me, and could hear them scrambling down the trail behind me. They had no shoes and the trail was really rocky, so I knew if I just kept running, they couldn't keep up for very long. After about 15 minutes, I slowly heard their cries die down to the point where I could no longer hear them. It took me 6 hours to get back to the ranger station, with me running and then taking a break when I needed to. When I got to the ranger station, I threw open the door and began explaining what had just happened to the ranger. He knew I was serious from the emotion that I conveyed and told me that he was going to get some backup to go out there and check out the situation and to retrieve my belongings for me. He advised me to just sit tight in the ranger station and that they would be riding their ATVs out there within the hour. I told him that I would rather just go home and if they could just call me after they investigate the situation. He said okay. I drove the 2 hours home, told my family what had happened and waited with them for the phone call. I ended up falling asleep on my parents' bed like a child and slept through the night. The next morning, my father woke me up and told me that he had just gotten off the phone with the Rangers and that they had taken a man and a woman into custody. They told my father that the two people wouldn't identify themselves and that they found them on the trail walking back in the direction of the pond. The man and the woman were taken to a psychiatric hospital and were both identified as schizophrenic individuals. Nothing else was known about them. They couldn't figure out who they were or how they got into that location, and that's all they could tell us. As far as my equipment, I told them I didn't want it anymore, as much of it, I'm sure, was caked in blood and who knows what else. We found out a few months later that the couple had set up a campsite near the edge of the pond area, and that the Rangers had found one grave there of a very small miscarried fetus. The man and the woman were identified as a married couple who had gone off of their medication and decided to move out to the woods to live away from society. They, from what everyone guessed, had tried to start a family out there, but due to malnutrition, the woman had a miscarriage. I can only guess that the man had blamed himself for being no good and wanted me to take his place in impregnating his wife. This by far is the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me, and I have never been camping again since that day. This has forever changed me as a person and has made me very wary of strangers. I hope no one ever has to experience what I did on that day.